Welcome back. We're going to do a quick one today on KZ Vader. So I would call KZ Vader the brother to CCA Trio. They are both 3 dynamic drivers, but this one is the Vader high resolution version. So the tuning is actually quite different than CCA Trio. This is definitely for the boosted treble fans, whereas Trio was more of a warm balanced, and that's probably why the other Vader version is called balanced, because that tuning definitely leans in that way. But this is the high resolution version. This is, I would call this the shell lineup, and so this is, I would call this almost the medium version of KZ shell. This is a slightly smaller version. This is the Murga set, which I will talk about probably tomorrow. But both of these are actually tuned quite similarly. They are both treble heavy sets, very treble heavy for KZ anyway. So this is a triple dynamic driver. This is a dual dynamic driver. You can actually see it there. So we'll talk about this one tomorrow, but I just wanted to kind of do, this is the smallest, or kind of the, I mean, not the smallest, but definitely the smaller version of this, which is more of a medium, as opposed to something like Symphony, which is their larger version of shell. So that is Vader. That's what it looks like. There are some switches on the side, and those let you adjust the bass and some other mid and upper range things, but mostly I just use them to move the bass. So for the quick people who just want to hit and run on the video, this is the high resolution version, and like I said, it's very much a specialist tuning, definitely for the treble heavy boosted style people who like that. This is not similar to Trio. This is, I called it a specialist. If you are looking for a general purpose earphone, that is the balanced version, the one that will be much closer to Trio. This one is, I would say, nothing like Trio. So what I expected, though, a more refined Trio, to really reveal more resolution. I think that would have been a pretty good idea. That was one of my nitpicks about Trio originally, was you got 3 dynamic drivers. There actually was a little bit of resolution to get out of that tuning. It was a little bit warm, a little bit over kind of mid-bassy, and they could have really refined that into something that was a little leaner and would have brought out more detail and more resolution. That's sort of what I was expecting. What I didn't quite expect was they really harmonized a Trio tuning, and then it gave it a treble boost. And if we look at the graph real quick, you can kind of see what they did. So Vader is in the red, and I just picked Moondrop Land because I think that's a really solid, not overly heavy bass, just kind of a nice balanced, you know, a tuning that actually brings out the best in a driver. And I think the Land's driver was actually quite good. That was what I had in my mind of how they could have really addressed a higher resolution version of Vader. So if we look at Vader in the red and we look at the Harman target in the dotted line, you can kind of see that, yeah, the sub bass, they went a little bit shy, but the rest of it, you know, basically the Harman target is covered by Vader high resolution up to about here, and then they really boosted the treble over the Harman target, which again, that was a little bit of a mystery to me why they went, I call above the Harman target almost a no-fly zone. The point at which you go above and offset from the Harman target, those become tougher sets for general appeal. That's a lot of treble. That's a pretty intense amount of treble. So that's why I kind of said that. I think what they could have done is just really kept kind of this Land line. And yeah, they could have definitely gave it a little bit more body, just the way Land did. Give it a little bit of mid-bass. That gives it a little bit more body, a little bit more naturalness to the sound. But then go, you know, either hug the Harman target or go 1 or 2 dB below the Harman target like Land does. That would have been a very nice, solid, you know, would have been plenty of detail. These 3 drivers could have handled that quite well. Instead, we kind of get this version of treble, which is heavily boosted, and that's going to appeal to a limited number of people. So, and because of that, we'll go through this one kind of quickly, because again, like this one isn't going to be a general purpose set like Trio. This one is very much aimed towards people who are into a big treble boost like that. So Vader does in fact sound sharp and clear, but it really sounds compressed because of that treble boost. The emphasis is on the upper range, has clarity to it, but there isn't really a natural balance or a weight to it. And that's why I said it really needed a different kind of bass shelf that was more like Land to really balance out the amount of treble boost that they put into it. The sound signature will definitely work better for non-vocal genres or even games. it definitely is off natural. And if you're used to hearing or very familiar vocals, like your favorite singers, vocalists, those are going to sound a little bit off because there's such a dominance on the high end. Their voices are going to sound, you know, like almost like a speaker that doesn't have enough bass to it. You know, you get that thin, tinny sound to it. That's kind of what comes across on this because there's so much treble going on. So sound, and I'll say to KZ's credit, if you look carefully at how they actually increase the treble, you'll notice an even boost over the treble, and that's very interesting to me. It's a very interesting concept because it creates an upper range heavy sound, but not a peaky sound. So in a way, this is KZ showing off that they can do frequency control, and I do like the idea, but it really needs a refinement and a balance to pass the Adele test. And like I was saying, when you start listening to your favorite vocalist and someone like Adele, who has a very familiar sound to her voice, and you try to figure out what's going on with this kind of tuning and why her voice sounds a little off, why it sounds a little thin, why it doesn't quite sound all like Adele. It kind of loses its Adele-ness to it, and it doesn't quite pass that familiarity test to it. And, you know, but if you look at what they really did here, the way they lift this off and almost offset from the Harman target, that's pretty interesting. Lots of other brands who don't do electronic tuning would end up with kind of weird peakiness here, and you would end up with trying to replicate this level of treble with just physical tuning. I think that would have been really hard to do, and you would end up with a really peaky mess. And instead, you just end up with this even offset, even, you know, boost to treble. And again, I think that's an interesting concept. I think they just have to work on it to get the balance right to it. I think they kind of worked out the technical capability of doing the treble in that way and offsetting it and giving you almost a PEQ version in hardware of what a boosted treble would sound like. Cool idea. They just kind of need to get the tuning right and some balance to it and get Adele to sound like Adele. So the bass, again, this one, the bass is kind of the third player in this one. It's a tight and clean, but it really needed that mid-bass boost to be the back end to the treble. The balanced version graphs, and it looks a little overcompensated, kind of almost like Trio. I think both of those went a little bit too heavy. Something in between the two probably would have worked out quite well. If you imagine where Trio was, Trio actually has this big bump over here, and if you can imagine kind of where Lan is, and you drew a line that was sort of the average between Trio or Vader balanced and where high resolution is, kind of that middle line would have been the perfect kind of glide bass that would have worked really well. And then, you know, either following the landline here or following the Harman target, I think would have brought the treble down. Anyway, it had a really nice balanced set that brought out more detail and resolution, kind of what they were going for. So in the mids, again, this high resolution is, you know, in this case, it does sound clean. It does sound sharp. It sounds a little bit thin, but really so much contribution from the treble. There was really no way to get around it sounding sharp and thin as it does. With the balance shifted so bright, there isn't necessarily more resolution. It just sounds compressed in range. Like I said, it sounds almost like a speaker that only can do a certain frequency range. You sort of lose the bottom end. You lose the kind of the front and the back to most notes and vocals. Lots of female vocals don't have the bottom end. Males are way too high. Again, this is all just kind of shifted much higher. It loses a lot of its naturalness and what you kind of expect from even most KZ sets have pretty decent balance, and this one is definitely shifted quite a bit. And the idea is right. I think just the tuning is off. I think the idea is that you raise the treble level just over balance, not go 2 to 3 dB, but just maybe 1 dB over the balance point. That will give you a more resolving, more resolving sound without the BA timbre, because now we have 3 dynamic drivers as opposed to balanced armatures. You'd have end-to-end coherence because now we're using all dynamic drivers. And I think that idea of doing a higher resolution version of Trio was the right idea. Just this version of it didn't really work for me. And you pair that with a slight bass boost, kind of like Lan, and then that will sound more natural, somewhere between Trio and Vader. And like I said, that would have worked out pretty well. And will it EQ? It definitely will 100% EQ. And if you actually use this guide as kind of where I was going for it, right? So leave the sub bass alone because the sub bass is kind of fine. Do a little mid bass bump, which would actually put you right into the land area, and that's kind of what the vocals need to have a little bit more body. And then basically take a lot of this offset that KZ did and bring it down 1 or 2 dB and just drop it back down to the Harman target, and then you basically end up with something that's very tuned closely to LAN, because LAN is a very fine sounding set, and I think Vader with 3 dynamic drivers would have actually pulled that tuning off quite well, similarly in the same way that LAN does. So that is what I got on Vader high resolution. So again, if you are into a more general purpose, looking for something that's a little bit like Trio, that is the balanced version, not the high resolution version. But thank you guys anyway for tuning in, and I will see you next time.